Okay, it's 2 o'clock. Maayong hapon sa tanan. Welcome to the Foundation for a Sustainable Society Incorporated's our first anniversary webinar on rising up to the challenge social enterprises in the time of COVID-19.
Social enterprises in time of COVID-19.
Okay. I am Butch Salera of the Philippine Cooperative Central Fund Federation, and PCF for short, and I am a member of FSSI's Board of Trustees.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here on Zoom, and also those who are tuned into our live stream on Facebook. I am Larry Milian. I'm also a member of the FSSI's Board of Trustees representing the National Council of Churches in the Philippines, or NCCP. We look forward to having a meaningful discussion with you all this afternoon. Before we proceed with the program, for those who have not yet answered our pre-webinar poll on your screens, may we request you to do so. The survey box will automatically close when you have finished answering the 2 questions. We would also like to remind you of remind everyone of the house rules. 1, always mute your microphone. We have set an open forum during the webinar where you can raise your questions to our speakers. Only unmute when called to speak. The moderators may mute your mic at any time to avoid background noise. For the open forum, please type in your questions or comment in the chat box. Please include your name and your organization. If you are addressing your question or comment to a particular speaker, please indicate that during the open forum, you may be called by the moderators so you can ask your comment directly, or the moderators may read your comment or questions for you. Please shut off your video to optimize bandwidth. Third, do not share your screen to make any kind of presentation. And lastly, the webinar is being recorded and will be shared to all the participants. We'll also email to you a copy of the key takeaways of the discussion. We now have the results of our poll, which gives us some information about our participants on Zoom. It will be shown here. Here are the results. On the first question, so most of us answering are here in NCR. 27% are outside Luzon, 5% in the Visayas, and 10% in Mindanao. Now, on the second question, how severe has the effect of COVID-19 been on you and your family? The biggest percentage is moderate at 54%, then minimal at 24%, then severe 20%, and very severe at 2%. So you have your, these are the results of the poll. We assume this profile applies as well to our participants on FB Live.
Okay, thank you, Larry. Yung FSSI's first anniversary webinar, Rising Up to the Challenge, Social Enterprises in the Time of COVID-19, will look into the situation and outlook for the Philippine economy, particularly the challenges and prospects for social enterprises in light of COVID-19. This webinar will be the first of a series lined up to mark FSSI's 25th anniversary this 2020. I'd like to introduce you FSSI for those who are not familiar. FSSI is a social investment organization committed to support the development of sustainable communities through social enterprises. It was established in 1995 through a successful Debt for Development agreement between the governments of the Philippines and Switzerland. FSSI supports enterprises with triple bottom lines, or we call 3BL, of people, planet, and profit through financial and non-financial products and services. Since 1995, it has assisted more than 200 social enterprises. FSSI is governed and supported by its membership of 19 national and subnational networks of civil society organizations. We would like now to acknowledge the chairperson of FSSI. From the Association of Foundation, he's the executive director, Mr. Oman Yao.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And welcome to the first of a series of our anniversary webinars. We're very happy that you could join all of us in this afternoon. And we're especially thankful for Doc Shell and Rico for sharing their time this afternoon. And of course, as well as their knowledge and their expertise as we try to survive this pandemic. We think that most of us are extremely affected, and we're hoping that we'll be able to not only survive but actually thrive through this crisis. As most Filipinos, I'd like to think, are pretty resilient in times of crisis. I'd like to especially thank as well Butch and Larry for taking on the role of moderator this afternoon. We certainly hope that this will be a good learning experience for everyone, in as much as we would like to ask you to participate well in the open forum after the presentations of our resource persons. FSSI will also be celebrating its General Assembly on Tuesday next week. So for our members, we certainly hope to see you on Tuesday afternoon as well. So I guess that's all that I really need to say, and wishing everyone well, and wishing everyone to have a good learning experience for this afternoon. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Oman. We will now introduce you to our first speaker, who will provide us with insights on the Philippine economic situation and outlook, particularly for micro, small, medium enterprises in light of COVID-19. Dr. Cielito Habito is a professor of economics at the Ateneo de Manila University, where he is also a senior fellow and former director of the Ateneo Center for Economic Research and Development. He is also chairman of Brain Trust, Inc. and Operation Compassion Philippines. His op-ed column, No Free Lunch, appears twice weekly in the Philippine Daily Inquirer. In 1992 to 98, he served in the cabinet of former President Fidel V. Ramos as Secretary of Socio-Economic Planning, heading the National Economic and Development Authority. Before joining government, he was professor and chair at the Department of Economics of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. He had also worked at the World Bank, Harvard University, Center for Southeast Asian Studies in Kyoto University, and Asian Development Bank Institute in Tokyo. Dr. Habito has been tapped by multilateral and bilateral development agencies to advise the government of the Philippines and of other countries in Asia Pacific and Latin America. He has served in the boards of First Gen, Sun Life Financial, Manila Water Company, Metrobank, and Field Steel Holdings, among others. He holds a Ph.D. and Masters of Arts in Economics from Harvard University, Master of Economics from the University of England, Australia, and Bachelor of Science in Agriculture, major in Agricultural Economics, graduating summa cum laude from the University of the Philippines. We are grateful and honored to have him with us today. And without further ado, we call on Professor Chell.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that very kind introduction. I thought I sent a shorter one, but it looks like yung pang-commission and appointments yung nagamit. Let me just put up my screen now. And as you can see, my job for this next 25 minutes is to talk about the Philippine economy within the crisis and beyond. And so first of all, I'd like to greet all of our co-advocates for social enterprise who are with us this afternoon. I hope you can pick up something from my own sharings of my impressions on the Philippine economy right now, the challenges we face, and how social enterprises eventually can fit into the picture, especially in the post-COVID recovery. I asked two simple questions. Where are we? Where are we now? And where are we headed? Or what lies ahead? Now, first of all, I'd like to begin, of course, by describing where we are now with my trademark PITIC test. So many of you who have heard me before probably know that I like to summarize the performance of the economy into presyo, trabajo, and kita. The reason being that these are the three economic variables that everybody can really relate to most directly: prices, jobs, and incomes. And the other reason for the PITIC test, that I call it, is I also consider it a quick and reliable test, in the same way that many of you perhaps test fruit in the market with a PITIC, and depending on the sound it makes, people say they can tell whether it's ripe or not yet ripe, and so on. So it's a quick and reliable test. Now, the other thing I have to explain to audiences who have not heard me before is my color coding. The good news for an Ateneo professor like me is in blue, and the bad news is in the other challenging color. So here we are. We have, for 2020, more greens than blues. The only blue thing is prices, because they have been relatively stable. The inflation rate has been at a manageable rate. In fact, it's a normal rate of 2.5% last year and up to this year. But it's jobs and income measured by GDP, which has really been at risk, and in fact very much troubled right now because of the COVID-induced economic standstill or lockdown. So let me go a little bit more into the diagrams that show this. This is the roller coaster we have been on just within the last 3 years for inflation. We had peaked at 6.7% late in 2018, and that was a year when we averaged 5.2%. 2.5% was the average last year, and this is where we are right now as of last June. Now, the jobs picture is best presented in this summary table of the labor force survey, which is taken every quarter, January, April, July, and October. So the latest available right now is the data gathered by the Philippine Statistics Authority in April, where we all probably remember now that it was announced that we had, 17.7% unemployment as of April 2020. And we lost, compared to exactly a year ago, almost 8 million jobs. In fact, the total count of our unemployed is actually 7.25 million. So if that looks like more than 7.25, it's because some of those who lost their jobs simply dropped out of the labor force. Now you can see that the underemployment rate, which means you are employed, but you're not working enough to make your ends meet, has also gone up significantly back to where it had been for many years, near 20%, when we had already gone to 13.4% as of 1 year ago. So again, jobs are in a relatively bad situation right now, and frankly, it could get worse. The April numbers are not yet the worst of it, I think. In fact, I characterize the situation as a collapse in the job market. And here in this table, I like to show the quality of jobs, because if you look at the statistics, there are 4 types of workers: wage and salary workers, and then there are 2 kinds of so-called own account workers. Those who are individually self-employed, and you can think about fishbowl vendors, pedicab drivers, those who are self-employed individually. But there are also self-employed who employ others. These are the self-employed with employees. So you can imagine these are the enterprises. These are especially small and probably micro and small enterprises. And the last category is the unpaid family workers, the farm workers of the family who don't get paid, they work, or maybe it's the family business like a sari-sari store. Now, if you look at the numbers, especially as of the April numbers, it's very disturbing. First of all, there's been a loss of jobs all across the board. But the other thing that disturbs me is that the proportion of wage and salary workers has gone down. So this is a lower percentage than a year ago. And that also shows that there's 5.3 on the right, 5.3 million jobs lost. But the one I like to highlight, especially for this audience, is that that second to the last number, negative 513, means 513,000 less of people who are self-employed with employees. And to me, that is the statistic for micro and small enterprises, because the one collected by DTI from the LGUs is not really a reliable count of small businesses in actual operation. It's just registered. But many of those registered perhaps closed down or stopped operations within the year. This one, which is a quarterly survey, actually tells us who among those self-employed with employees are really still there. And so again, this tells us that more than 500,000 MSMEs have probably disappeared in the past year alone. Okay, let me just... Now, kita is, of course, measured by GDP, whose other side of the coin is income, or output, rather, production. Now, the good thing about our GDP story is that since the 1980s, we've really come a long way. We have reached a new growth track that has progressed from an average annual growth of 1.8% only in the 1980s to 2.9 during the 1990s to 4.8 in the past decade, and now in this last decade, 6.2% average. But as we all know, the momentum is now broken because we actually just only had less than 6% reported last year, but even worse in the first quarter of this year, negative, which is something we haven't seen since 1997. So again, that momentum apparently has faltered. I hope it can be regained somehow. So these are the numbers of the GDP growth broken up into the three major sectors. And you can see again, for the first quarter, it was industry that was actually worst hit. And in industry, the biggest part of that is manufacturing. But agriculture also went negative, and it has been negative too much of the time, unfortunately. And services remains the more resilient sector in our economy. And in fact, it is the biggest subsector. It's the biggest major sector in our entire economy. So it's always been a reliable job creator. You can also look at our GDP from the spending or the demand side. Now, who are the main sources of demand for our production of goods and services? It's households in their personal consumption expenditures, it's government for its consumption expenditures, and also for its capital outlays or investment expenditures. Now, the government investments or infrastructure is in the cluster under fixed capital formation, and you can see it there. No? It's a slight positive because government deliberately tries to spend as much as it can to help stimulate the economy. And in fact, it's 7.1% for government consumption, meaning spending for office supplies and other things that are needed by government to operate. No? But durable equipment, which is most likely factory machines, air conditioning, refrigerators, vehicles, and so on, also a deep negative of 7.7, while exports have also gone down. It's a -3. So you can see that the first quarter has really been bad news for the economy, whether you look at the production or income side or from the spending side. Now, just to get a few other advanced indicators beyond the first quarter, we already have numbers for inflation rate up to June, no? And I already said it's 2.5. Unemployment for the second quarter, meaning the April survey was already there. Manufacturing has actually gone negative since March, and it became deeper in April, although it became slightly less deep, but still very deep, -40 in May. So in other words, a lot of manufacturing has gone on a standstill. And so about the only thing that is keeping that from being -100, which is what happens no? If there's a total standstill, zero output today compared to last year, -100% yon. No? But it's -40 because the essentials like food manufacturing and other, pharmaceutical products and so on had to go on. Power consumption, especially by industry, is another good barometer of the economy. And you can see how in April it dropped by 44.5%. Now, slightly better, but still very bad at negative 37.5 in May. So you look down the line, the only thing I'd like to highlight is OFW remittances. This has not seen negative numbers for a long, long time. And first time we're seeing negative, meaning talagang bumaba ang remittances. And it's double-digit decline as of April. This is worrisome because the bulk of our personal consumer expenditures, and let me go back to that slide on GDP. I'm sorry, on this one, in the spending side. The first line is really propelled to a large extent by the remittances. In fact, Hans C, of the Mall of Asia, the C family, has once admitted that 70% of their business comes from the OFWs. And that's why they consider it a debt of gratitude to the OFWs. So pag bumaba yung OFW remittances, that biggest chunk of our demand side for GDP is also going to be very badly hit. And mind you, again, this household consumption expenditures or personal consumption is 70%, or actually to be more exact, 68% of our total GDP already. So there's one thing I wanted to point out to this group, because I am always amused and somewhat disturbed by the fact that the financial services sector, meaning the banks especially, and the insurance companies included, are actually growing very healthily, whether or not the economy is up or down. If you look at 2004 to 2019, that's 15 years, the average GDP growth was 5.8%. The average financial sector growth was 8.9%. And when the GDP was at its slowest, at 0.9% in 2009, guess what? The bank still grew by 7.1%. Now, last year, GDP was 6, banks or financial sector, 11.9, double digits. And this first quarter, negative 0.2, everybody knows that. Guess what? Financial sector grew 9.6%. So I like to say that, wala silang talo, no? The big banks win through thick or thin. BDO profits were up 35%, Metrobank 28%, BPI 25%, Land Bank 20%, Security 17%. So, swerte talaga ang mga nasa banking sector. So it's no surprise, by the way, that our top billionaires are really ones who own banks. So let me look what lies ahead. There are three main questions here. What's the economic outlook like? In other words, how badly hit has our economy been, and therefore how will we recover? Second, how do we speed up that recovery? And third, what would and what should the new normal be like? And I think this is a question we all like to discuss, because we can all contribute to that. But first, what is the economic outlook like? How deep is the impact of COVID really going to be? Like I said, we already know that it was 0.2 negative in the first quarter. Well, to cut a long story short, I expect it to be in the neighborhood of negative 20 in the second quarter. And why is that? If I just look at some standstill sectors, these are the sectors that must have fallen by 50 to 100% because they almost stood still. Retail, trade, tourism, construction, manufacturing, transport, totaling 43% of GDP. You multiply that, if we just conservatively assume that there's a 50% drop in their output, and really that's probably an underestimate because many of them actually shut down, no? Negative 100 dapat. No? Anyway, that will already give you negative 21.5, and that's the likely Q2 figure. And the reason that's not outlandish is, I don't know if you've heard that Singapore announced that its second quarter growth was negative 42%. And so even if this effect only lasts one quarter and it sort of goes to about zero in the third and fourth quarter, it will be no better than about negative 6% for the whole year. So that's more or less the kind of economic contraction that we can expect. Now, how will we recover? Will we bounce back so that it's a letter V recovery? Or will it be a U, wherein that bottom of the U may be prolonged, so we'll stay down longer before we really begin going up? Now, the most pessimistic ones say, baka L, will stay down for a long time. The graph on the economy, that is. Well, it all depends on how fast the standstill sectors can recover. And I think the retail, trade, and tourism sectors, which are most badly hit, will probably recover very, very gradually. Construction can do a quick rebound, especially the government projects, but even private construction projects remain on a standstill because of the uncertainty in real estate. Manufacturing and transport may be slow to moderate. But again, the winners are online retail like your Lazada and Shopee, the logistics that supports these online commerce sites, of course, the internet and telecom sector itself, and then healthcare services, which cannot stop and has to escalate, in fact. No? But manufacturing will be sluggish because even before COVID, the world trade slowdown because of Trump's US-China trade war has already slowed down the world economy due to slowing of world trade. But social distancing will remain common. International travel is nearly at a standstill, and therefore the world economy is down. And we'll also see more work from home. And this tells me that those with, and because those with cars and motorcycles will probably avoid public transport, and there's a lot of people work from home, then again, this tells us that it's hard to tell whether the traffic will be worse or better once the things normalize. My conclusion anyway is a V recovery is impossible. It's more likely going to be an extended U type of recovery. In other words, some more time before we start going up. Now, we all heard about flattening the curve. In this curve that I got from Congresswoman Sharon Garin's PowerPoint, this was just to show that if you try to move from the red to the blue graph, and on the upper side is the COVID graph, the incidence. If you want to flatten the COVID curve, it will be at the expense of deepening the reduction in the economy's growth. No? So that means mas lalalim yung ating recession the more that we lock down. And that is, of course, the debate going on right now. Should we lock down more, but we will be choking the economy? Well, we did lock down for about 3 months. No? But what did we achieve by that lockdown? Did we flatten the curve? Well, sad to say, it didn't look like it got any flatter. And in fact, it seems to have gotten worse. So yun ang nakakahinayang. No? So we had immobilized our economy for nothing, it seems. So really, the question before us, what is the right balance that we have to take about the economy? Now, right now, the question, how do we speed up the recovery? How do we restore all the jobs? So the four essential concerns are, how do we meet our essential needs? So which economic activities must go on? How do we restore jobs? So we ask, which are the industries and occupations that account for more jobs? So we focus on that. How do we restore incomes as quickly as possible? So the same question, which industries contribute to the most output and income? So we can focus on that. And then what areas are least at risk? So we can focus on that. Well, if you look at all of these, well, first of all, we all know what the essential industries are, so I will not further elaborate on these. What are the ones that have the most jobs? It's actually wholesale and retail trade, agriculture, construction, manufacturing. Most of that are the most sensitive to the COVID, where it's very difficult to have social distancing. In other words, these are still going to have to stay somewhat restrained and limited because of the need for social distancing. So it's going to be a challenge to restore jobs. Which industries contribute the most to GDP? It turns out manufacturing is actually the biggest contributor now to GDP. And you can see down the line in this list. Again, these are the same sectors where it's hardest to open up again, if only to revive the economy quickly, because that's where the danger for COVID is also greatest. Now we go to the third question. Let me just say a little bit more about which will contribute more to GDP in terms of the spending side. It's the household final consumption expenditures that must recover quickly if we want the economy to recover quickly. But I already said OFW remittances are actually turning down for the first time in our history. So that means problema din yung final household consumption expenditures. And even the durable equipment investments will not be forthcoming for a while. No? So we have a problem here. How about areas? Well, the areas that contribute the most to our jobs and GDP happen to be NCR, your Region 3 or Central Luzon, and Calabar Zone. In the Visayas, it's Region 7 and now 6 also, Iloilo, Western Visayas and Cebu area. In Davao, it's of course, the Holy Land, the Davao region. So What do you do about jobs and GDP in terms of geographic opening up? Well, it turns out where the COVID incidence is most severe is also where you want to open up quickly if you want to get the most numbers. Because if you look at the map, in terms of COVID incidence, of course, the red is the worst areas. In terms of GDP contribution, you can also see it's those similar areas. So you have your hands are tied. You can't really open up because that's where COVID is strongest. In terms of contribution to jobs, looking at population concentration, it's the same areas. So we're really in a bind in terms of how to restore jobs most quickly. So given that, we really need to do a phased reopening, and we have to look at what to first resume. And the things that will be reconfigured in the new normal will be restaurants, consumer retails, and malls to be scaled down dramatically. Now, imagine cinemas where 2 out of every 3 chairs is pulled out just so they will be distancing. Imagine restaurants where the tables now have to be spaced so far apart. So again, that means a very limited scale of operation for many of these businesses. Of course, again, we have more automation and ICT to be applied where it's suitable, like in manufacturing, education, of course, and other services and healthcare still. To be scaled up, obviously, are online retail like Lazada and Shopee, and more will be coming up. Logistics, internet services, and then we'll see more work from home in finance, utilities, business, and services. Well, I'll probably not discuss this too much, but let me sum it up. This is a SWOT slide, no? So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And the green arrows are coming from what I consider the weaknesses or threats, and the blue arrows from the strengths and opportunities. So again, you'll have these slides later on. I don't have the time to elaborate on this, but I want to focus now on an important threat, and that is our inability to attract foreign direct investments that could otherwise create a lot of jobs. In the last 3 years, our FDI has been dropping significantly. In 2018, it dropped by 4.9%. In 2019, it dropped by 23.1%. In 2020, first quarter alone, it has already dropped 36%. Now, what's happening? The problem is our neighbors are actually still increasing in terms of, in terms of their FDI. Tumataas pa yung mga neighbor natin. Okay, I'm gonna have to bring that back. Kulelat pa tayo in terms of the amount that we are able to attract. So in spite of this supposed opportunities from the US-China trade war, we're not cashing in on that because it's our neighbors who are actually getting the windfall from the investments moving out of China. Now, what's the outlook for the year? You notice those ones that I X'd out are the ones that were the original projections as of last February, before the COVID came in. Now it's going to be a dramatic double-digit unemployment for sure. And as I said, for the full year, it is at least going to be a -6%, and probably worse, the way that the pandemic has extended, and we're not seeing the light at the end of the tunnel as of now, it seems. Globally, the problem is there are tendencies to actually go to a worse normal rather than a better new normal. And why do I say that? Well, one of the big pressures among governments is to actually ease up or set aside environmental regulations, because supposedly they raise the cost of doing business and it will get in the way of restoring businesses again. So Trump is known to have already reversed 100 environmental rules in the United States. And all that is telling us is that, okay, when they get back to normal, they'll probably be in a worse situation in terms of sustainability into the future. And in the Philippines, the one thing I called attention to in my column was they inserted a provision in the economic stimulus bill that will keep the Philippine Competition Commission from doing its job for up to 1 year. So they will not be able to stop mergers and acquisitions. And for example, if Globe and Smart decide to buy the third telecom, they will not be stopped by the PCC because the insertion in the economic stimulus bill, the ARISE bill, will prohibit them from stopping it. So we could end up with the worst normal in terms of more monopolies and bigger cartels. No? So that is one of the threats that we're seeing right now. Now, the World Bank expects the global GDP to go down by 5.2%. Advanced economies will shrink by 7%, but the emerging markets like ourselves will fall by less, by 2.5%. To be honest with you, I think all these projections by World Bank, ADB are still too optimistic. You can already see that my projection for the Philippines alone is -6. So anyway, there will continue to be disruptions, especially because the oil market has collapsed. Trade in commodities that are needed for industrial production has also led to prices tumbling. And some of these we are exporters of, like nickel and so on. And the trade restrictions and supply chain disruptions are also affecting the flow of food across the globe and raising the questions on food security. Now, what would the new normal be like? Again, I don't have time. My time is running out, but I will just highlight these more localized value chains with the blue letters here. Urban agriculture has come up. Suddenly people are growing their own vegetables, even in little plastic pots or even the half litro bottles that were cut into two. I can attest, even in our home here in Los Baños, of course, may lupa kami sa paligid, we are now growing a lot of our own vegetables, and we are up to our ears in okra, actually. But the vegetables we are also finding that we can buy now from people who actually bring them door to door are coming from closer distances, not like the usual value chain where it comes all the way from Benguet and far away. This is a healthy development, we think, because it is actually enlivening local production and local enterprise. And so this is something that is welcome to my mind in terms of the new normals that are emerging. But we want to shape that new normal to be a better normal. And these pictures I have here would illustrate exactly what those features are, including more and better equipped hospitals, more geographically dispersed economic activities, more diversified and modernized agriculture sector, more livable cities with clean air and again, greenhouse gas emissions and climate change and disaster resilient, better internet, hopefully, and wider accessibility. Of course, effective social protection systems. And here I like to emphasize the need for not social distancing, but social bonding. Perhaps we can keep the physical distancing, but please, let's not distance ourselves from one another in the human sense, no? Because we all know that what is the most basis for happiness of people is our relationships. It's not our material accumulation. So one of the challenges to us is looking forward, how do we strengthen social bonding? Well, there are things we can do, and I will not read them one by one, towards achieving a truly inclusive economy. And social enterprise plays a very important role in the achievement of a more inclusive economy, the triple bottom line. But there are other things like, decongest Metro Manila, scale down the capacity of the Manila port, divert all that traffic to Batangas, Subic, and other regional ports, so that we don't congest Manila simply because all of the shipments coming in and out are being landed in the Manila port. There's several more here that I'll just skip discussing. Again, more effective social protection. The national ID is something that's going to be very important. Universal healthcare really has to be fully funded for everybody to feel secure about getting the medical attention when they need it. And then again, we have to look at physical development and make it more climate change resilient. We have to overhaul the public transport system. And some of these things are happening now, but there's a lot of issues on phasing out the jeepneys, etc. We should have more bicycles, more bicycle lanes, pedestrian-friendly cities. And again, as I said, towards social bridging and deeper human relationships, there are things that we can do. Road sharing programs, the idea of Tony Oposa that, once a week you close down main thoroughfares so that people can pedestrians can actually be the ones to enjoy the thoroughfares, and other similar ideas. Well, at the end, I just want to say that a lot of us are hoping that we will have a better normal. Will the world really change for the better, for good as a result of this? Well, those of us who are cynical point out to how during the world financial crisis of 2008-2009, There was a lot of talk about reforming the world financial system. Take away those very big financial houses with very high CEO salaries, taking undue risks. But guess what? After the crisis blew over, they were back to their old habits. So only time will tell whether the new normal that COVID-19 is leading the world to will really be better or, God forbid, worse for us all. Maraming salamat, and I'll be happy to answer questions later on.
Thank you for your presentation, Professor Shell. It's indeed a big challenge to hurdle for all of us. It's been said na tayo daw mga Pilipino are the very resilient one, but I wonder how far and what can we really do to get through, no? The U or the L recovery. At this point, I just would like to mention that we have about 89 gadgets connected to our Zoom account, and I'm sure that there are more than 89 people watching together on those gadgets. And on FB Live, we have about 100 participants. Welcome our viewers on FB Live. To proceed, social enterprises, or SEs, are among the most affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, but are also among the most critical sectors that played an important role in responding to the crisis. Our next speaker will talk about the challenges, prospects, and opportunities for SEs that emerged during the pandemic. As a social enterprise incubator, he will provide insights on what their industry are looking at in investing in an SE post-COVID-19. Mr. Rico Gonzalez is the co-founder and managing director of Xchange, an impact first social enterprise incubator in the Philippines, investing in and mentoring high potentially early stage social enterprises to help them become financially sustainable and achieve scale of impact. Rico got his early exposure to the social enterprise sector at the Ateneo Center for Social Entrepreneurship, where he served as director until 2011. He founded Xchange with his wife that same year. Today, supported by a small team of professionals and based on insights and challenges from their active engagements with the enterprises in their portfolio, they continue to collaborate on initiatives and experiments to address the still substantial gaps in the startup ecosystem for social enterprises. We are sure that many of you, including me, are looking forward to learning from the presentation of Mr. Gonzalez. So Rico, we turn over the slides to you.
Magandang hapon po. Let me just share my screen. Can you see that? Hello?
Yes, we can see that, Rico.
Okay, so let me begin. After I got this invitation, I was trying to figure out, given the seriousness of the situation we're in, how do I start on a light note? And really, it occurred to me, you know, as I was reflecting on the situation, sorry, my slides do not want to move. There. Let me try again, huh? I don't know why it doesn't want to.
Yeah, you may have to click the arrow at the lower left.
Yes, for some reason now it doesn't want to show up. So,
Or your cursor arrows down.
sorry. Let me do that again. We practiced it so many times and then now it's acting up. So I was trying to figure out, how do I start this on a light note? Because it's so serious. And it occurred to me as I was thinking about this, it reminded me of some songs, rock songs that were popular when I was much younger. Are you seeing it now? Still no?
Not yet. Not yet.
Ah. Sometimes kahit multiple times ang practice. So slide, and then we start the. There. How about that?
Wala pa rin, sir.
Wala pa rin. So,
Ito. There. Does that do it?
yeah.
Yeah, it's there.
Okay. So it occurred to me this song that I knew when I was younger. It's the end of the world as we know it. I just wanted to make a point that there is really, in our view, no going back to the old way. What is the guiding assumption that we have for ourselves and for our entire portfolio? On balance, I think it is reasonable to suppose that life for us is going to be some version of what we have today for about a year or two. This is not a 3-month or a 6-month trajectory. It is, we think, a year or two at best. And so we must prepare for that. Why do I say that? Because I think it's unreasonable to suppose that we can go back to the old way until there is some measure of, some sense of safety for people to start going out and engaging the way they used to. No? And the way the pandemic is panning out, both in the Philippines and in some other larger countries, the rest of the world, is the only way this quiets down is if we get a vaccine. And the earliest possible release of the vaccine in the most optimistic scenarios is the middle of next year, 2021. And of course, one should assume that the countries that will get this vaccine first will be the developed countries that are producing the vaccine in the first place. So by the time the vaccine gets to us, it could well be 2022. Is that unreasonable? I don't think so. You know, the first vaccine that was ever produced was a smallpox vaccine that came out in 1796. Until 150 years later, we were still getting outbreaks of smallpox. So 2 years of getting kind of widespread access to this vaccine is actually already quite accelerated. All of the development is being accelerated now because of the urgency of the situation. But even though the world is much smaller today, it will still take time to actually get the vaccine where it needs to go. What has the pandemic taught us? What it has exposed is the limitations of our systems. Clearly, we were not prepared for this, right? There are deep deficiencies across most of our shared and our public systems. Whether you look at healthcare or transportation infrastructure or housing, even communication. And the thing I would point out is very clearly that the brunt of the impact is being borne by the poor. The formal data is not in yet, but I think it's safe to point out that this has widened the gap between the poor and the rich even further. And I think if you look at Dr. Shell's presentation, I think it's reasonable to say that the numbers of the poor will probably increase when we start to see the statistics come in. So it's quite a difficult situation. The intensity of that burden is also quite high among the poor. If you look at the recently released UNDP and ZEP rapid survey, in the ECQ, 83% of poor families had decreased income 34% permanently lost their income source. That's a big hit. What are the two things I would take away from this? First, just living with the situation for the next 2 years is going to be bad. And the longer we stay in it, the worse it's going to get. So we need to take measures, both personal and for our organizations, to adapt and to ensure that we make it through. Now, the problem is that requires resources, but it also requires a willingness to rethink how we approach things and how we use those resources. The one caveat that I would make is that there is a tendency for us, when we look at the Philippine narrative, to universalize the experience of Metro Manila. But we are also starting to see feedback. There's also been, of course, negative impact elsewhere. But with some of the enterprises in our portfolio that operate outside of Metro Manila, we're starting to see signs of a recovery that's happening faster than with the enterprises we're seeing here, which is reasonable because, the NCR has the brunt of the problem, NCR and Cebu. So that is a hopeful sign, but of course, it doesn't make it any less difficult for these enterprises because the magnitude of what they face, the difficulty of what needs to get resolved is actually quite huge and in many respects unprecedented. To be able to move back to the way we used to do things, I think really the critical thing is to contain the virus. We need to be assured or be able to assure ourselves and each other that we are all safe, reasonably so at least, that there are some precautions that can be taken that can keep us safe. So what does that mean for when we talk to our portfolio of companies? We're very explicit about this. The agenda has shifted. In our organization and the ones we assist, we are now more concerned about survival than outcomes. We want to ensure that the organizations that we believe can contribute to the common good are able to make it through this crisis. We are not alone here. We're in contact with some of our peers globally, and everybody's struggling through the same challenges. Social enterprises across the globe are trying to figure out how to, one, make it through this crisis, but also two, how to keep on contributing value to the ecosystem, even as they're trying to survive. We know that outcomes will be reduced. In some cases, our ability to achieve those no longer exists. And this is something that I think we need to seriously take a look at and concede. We encourage organizations, any social enterprise, to revisit their theory of change, because there are certain assumptions that you may have made when you first made your theory of change analysis that no longer hold true today. For example, we have one investee organization that had to completely stop activities because they were doing in-person training. This was an intervention to help disadvantaged youth prepare for and find jobs. But if you cannot have the live classes, then how do you intervene? And so the last few months have been spent really just trying to figure out, is there a way we can do this effectively entirely online, because we can now not have this direct contact. That will take time. There are hopeful signs that it can be done, but it requires a reinvention of the entire approach, basically back from ground zero. And that is only possible if the enterprise has resources. And thankfully, this company has just completed raising some capital, so it is able to do it. But there are others that are unable to do this. In fact, we have one company that I am a party to, where the recommendation was actually just to close down. because there was no way we could conceive of being able to deliver value over the next year or two without being in close personal contact with customers. When this decision becomes necessary, I think it's important to face the truth as early and as quickly as possible, and to make the choice and act early. Why is that valuable? Because only if you act while you still have funds can you cushion the blow for your employees. If you must close down, you are going to cause people to lose jobs. And if you wait too long, you're not even going to be able to pay separation. And that's critically important. And these are people that have served you and your agenda in good times. You need to watch out for them when things are difficult. And sometimes the best we can do is to face the music as quickly as possible. It is a sad reality, but I think we will see more of that. So how do we survive? There is a toolkit that came out with the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. That's online. It's a simple, straightforward toolkit in multiple languages. I think it helps people consider what they need to look at. So that may be worth looking at. In general, what we do with our portfolio is we talk about the runway, right? And by definition, the runway is the amount of cash you have minus your costs. If you divide that by your monthly expenses, then you can figure out how many months of survival your existing funds can provide. I would say, as a rule of thumb, if that number is less than 6 months, then your situation is urgent and dire, and you must act very, very promptly. Ideally, you would be looking at 12 months plus. If it's less than 6 months, then now is the time to reduce costs and to try and look for more money. Your financial surplus is critical in times of crisis to survival, and managing that is very, very important. I would say, though, that you should not do it blindly. We see too often where people just cut costs rapidly because they panic about taking the cost down, and they end up taking out the resources that are critical to them doing the work that fulfills the mission. So there is an important self-analysis that needs to get done. There's a lot of reflection about how you can reduce your cost base without removing your ability to deliver impact. Sometimes the decision is tough and you must consider delaying your ability to deliver impact. But that choice must be done deliberately. It must be done carefully. So while it is important to manage the runway, please, let's not do it blindly. We don't want to be in a situation where you cut your organization in half, you come out of this crisis, and then you cannot rebuild. Because that time lost is super valuable and you're not going to make it again. There is something that I think I should point out here, where for funders out there, getting the funding is absolutely critical to the survival of these enterprises. And so there's a real power that lies in the hands of organizations that have the ability to fund social enterprises through a crisis. I will come back to that later. But it is something that we need to accept, that there is, therefore now, in this situation, funding institutions kind of have almost, I would say, a power and the responsibility help the sector along. This slide I put in because there's a point that you might find controversial that I want to make while I have you as a captive audience. So the picture in that slide, those are African killifish. African killifish are the fastest known vertebrates. African killifish are the fastest maturing vertebrates on the planet. They go from newborn to mature in 2 weeks. People, humans, take about 25 years. I use that as a metaphor because, you know, when we started Xchange in 2011, we thought, you know, maybe it'll take 3 to 5 years to get a social enterprise to mature. By year 5, we revised that to 5 to 10, right? Now it's looking more like 10 to 15. So it takes a while for social enterprises to mature. And I think we need to be mindful of that. I bring that up because we all know, I don't have to tell you, how difficult it is to build a social enterprise and to make it successful. I would argue, some people don't consider this, but I would argue it is more difficult than building a commercial one. A commercial one is more straightforward. You just go where the money is. A social enterprise does not allow you to do that because you are bound to where your mission agenda is. And sometimes, most times, these are not the most profitable locations for an enterprise. But when you think of the maturity of a social enterprise, it isn't just being able to deliver your 3 bottom lines, right? What we always do is we test. We have 2 tests that we always ask for. One, is the social enterprise a going concern? This is an accounting concept which basically says, can it be assumed that you will be around for indefinitely for the future? And there are certain economic, financial indicators that help us pin that down. But also the other test, is it able to deliver impact consistently on a growing trajectory? If your enterprise is struggling to stay alive off and on, and if you're hugely dependent on external funding, I would argue that you're not yet at that mature level. And here is the thing, it takes a long time to get from startup to mature level. But delivery of the triple bottom line isn't what is going to determine your survival, right? Because we don't start on day 1 with a mature enterprise. We start with an experiment. We have an idea, we think it can solve a problem, we try it out. You get ultimately to the goal, hopefully, and that goal is to be able to consistently deliver the triple bottom line. But the goal of the triple bottom line is not the path. The path towards that triple bottom line has to be experimentation, iteration, and innovation, because we do not know what will work. And we need to pay attention to that also, right? I think in the Philippines, there's been a lot of focus on the triple bottom line, not enough focus on the path to getting there, right? We always ask ourselves, and we ask our entrepreneurs, why would we succeed in addressing a social problem where generations of social development actors before us have struggled? We're not smarter than they are. They've been at it for longer, right? It isn't reasonable for us to assume that we will get better results if we will simply try the same things that they tried. We have to be open to trying new things that haven't been tried before, because that is likely to be the path where we find sustainable, successful interventions that actually move the needle on our issues. So I have 2 examples that I wanted to highlight that came up in the course of the pandemic. Sitting in Metro Manila, through the course of the lockdown, we had no way to get our vegetables. So the vegetables started to get delivered to us direct from farm communities. And this happened very rapidly, right? The habit in Metro Manila is to buy your vegetables from supermarkets. Or particularly if you're looking at the exclusive villages, right? Where I would argue the target, the dream consumer resides, right? This is the dream market for a lot of vegetable selling businesses. But we never had access to that because this was a market that was cornered by the big commercial supermarket chains. In the course of the pandemic, suddenly, they could not go to their supermarkets. So they needed the vegetables delivered to them. And there were a lot of groups wanting to provide income sources to farmers that responded to that need. And so Xchange has direct contact and is aware of 3 organizations, for example, that were doing this, that together were delivering about 40 metric tons of vegetables on a weekly basis to this market, right? This premium market. What is somewhat frustrating and puzzling to me is because this was all built as a volunteer mechanism. Now that we are in GCQ, all of this is getting, well, not all, half of these are getting unwound because the entire supply chain was built on volunteer infrastructure and volunteer manpower. And guess what? When GCQ happened, the volunteers had to go back to work. And so suddenly the supply chain is disappearing. And so for me, I think this is one of the missed opportunities of the pandemic, right? If there was a silver lining to it, it was this, that we were able to get our vegetable producers directly in contact with the premium market that was always the dream to access. But now that we've come out of the worst of this lockdown, we are going to hand that back to the big commercial concerns that we're selling to them because we did not prepare for a more permanent supply chain. I think there is still a chance, there is still some opportunity to redeem that and to not make this a permanent loss. But it is a pity because we did not design for that from the very beginning. And if we had, this big problem that has been a problem for us, for a lot of agriculture-based social enterprises, the pandemic actually created an opening. But it's an opening that we may have missed. The other big change that I wanted to point out is in technology, in mobile payments. GCash is the perfect example of how you use, was a perfect example of how you use a crisis to achieve long-term value delivery, right? So what did they do? They had the system in place. They started volunteering the system as a way to fulfill financial assistance delivery to target populations in the course of the lockdown. By doing that, they were able to encourage more activation of their wallets. So their users doubled from about 5 million prior to the pandemic to about 10 million now. No? And usage, the value that moved through their system in this pandemic increased by 700%. And over time, this is going to be a huge value to GCash. And the value to them is going to be permanent because why do we say that? We've been long enough in this pandemic that behavior is changing. People are getting more used to mobile payments now. It's very convenient, and the likelihood that people will abandon this to go back to cash is actually relatively low. And so this is one of the things that we encourage. If you can start to look at technology in particular, because technology is a very democratizing force if you apply it properly. There are ways that it can be used to do things for the common good that were not available to us before, right? I will simply say, a small item like your mobile phone. Your mobile phone, the mobile phone in your pocket, is 100 times more powerful than the computing capacity that allowed the first men to go on the moon. Imagine the power of that in your pocket. What could you do with it? Could you use it to improve your inventory? Could you use it to get more revenue? There are countless ways in which it's valuable. But the ability to do that is one of the things that makes social enterprise survivable today when it was difficult to do so 20, 30, 40 years ago. So you have to embrace technology because it renders to you a very big advantage. And my view is, if you're going to play in markets, then you have to playing in markets is like playing chess, right? And playing chess is kind of a ruthless game. Any advantage that you do not take goes to your opponent. You may not notice it in the middle of the game, but you will regret it at the end of the game. So my advice always to social enterprises, if there is an advantage that can be obtained, better that you get it because you're working for the common good than you leave it on the table for the purely commercial interest. The last slide I want to show you is this one. And what I want to say is the need to be open to possibilities that we do not normally consider. A disrupted status quo allows things that we thought originally impossible. What you see in the slide is the picture of a completely locally produced ventilator for COVID treatment, for the most serious COVID treatment. This is now subject to FDA approval. So we're hopeful that the FDA will find that it is safe and that it can then be donated to where it is needed across the country. This was unthinkable in the beginning. In the beginning, it became clear to a bunch of people that there was no way we were going to be able to import ventilators. And our conversations with the Department of Health made it very clear that we didn't have enough across the country. And so a bunch of people independently said, okay, let's try to make one. But individually, our possibilities for success were so low that it seemed impossible. But the unthinkable happened. We actually got together collectively, doctors, engineers, some commercial manufacturers, university, and just private individuals got together and asked, okay, what needs to get done to get from point A to point B? And today we have a prototype that is up for testing. And when we look at it today, just 120 days ago, we would have said to you, impossible. And yet here we are, right? There is much further to go before that is going to be in the marketplace. But the urgency of the situation has allowed people to cut through the long process of building trust with each other. And so we have managed to bring a group together. This is one of our big privileges, to be an observer to this whole thing, where everybody has agreed that this will be given free. There is no profit motive in it. And the designs will be made available to everybody, because we're not sure that we'll be able, if we produce this in Metro Manila, we're not sure we will be able to get it to where it needs to go. So we want to make it possible for somebody in a provincial setting to build this themselves. For my last point, I just want to go back to the comment I made about funders. Funding for social enterprises is a very, very scarce resource. Demand is much greater than supply. Because it's essential to the success of any social enterprise, it is power. And with power comes a moral obligation that attends the exercise of that power. So for funders that are listening, I want you to consider this. If you support innovators, we have a fighting chance to make a real difference in a lot of the issue areas that we're trying to address. Without that funding, the likelihood of success is dismal, and the chances are that we will fail. And if we fail in 50 years, you will have a new set of panelists still talking about the same issues. I think it's time to try something somewhat different. Right? I want to end with this, kind of a bit of a personal anecdote. At home, I share a work area with my kids. We do co-working at home. They study, I work, right? And to kind of to brainwash my kids, I have quotations posted on my walls. We rarely talk about them, but they see them every day. And what do I have on my walls? One is from Gandhi. I'm sure you can guess. It says, "Be the change you want to see in the world." One is from Nelson Mandela. It says, "It always seems impossible until it is done." A third is from Wayne Gretzky. "You miss 100% of the shots you do not take." And finally, I have one from Winston Churchill. "Never, never, never give up." Maraming salamat po. Magandang hapon sa inyo lahat.
Thank you, Rico, for that enlightening delivery of your topic on social enterprise. I think you hit the nail when you said that there are a lot of challenges forthcoming and existing. At the same time, the words re-engineer, innovate, and adapt are things everyone has to address. And lastly, you mentioned the fact about the need for funding. I'd like to inform the participants here that FSSI just recently launched a social enterprise fund for women. This is a fund. Funds are available for women-owned businesses or women-run businesses. More details are available on the website. We now call on Engineer Sylvia Aquilay Paraguya. Engineer Sylvia, or Ibing, is the Chief Executive Officer of NATCO, or National Confederation of Cooperatives, a federation of 842 cooperatives with consolidated assets of 260 billion pesos and 5.8 million individual members. She is also a board member of FSSI. Ibing has a master's degree in business management from the Asian Institute of Management. 27 years of her nearly 3 decades of development work has been with the cooperative movement. Ibing?
Thank you, Larry, for the introduction. I'd like to repeat that I am a reluctant reactor to the two presenters. I told Dodo it should be him who should respond. I know cooperatives mostly. I hope I can do justice to the overall social enterprise ecosystem. Dodo said he would be overly exposed. Still, I had to thank Dodo for this assignment because it forced me to sit still, talk to some people, talk to my consultant, my husband, Paul Richard. And I had to go through the presentation several times. I am now here in our farm in Bukidnon. At kumakanta pa ako, where the air you breathe is soft and clean, and children play in the fields of green, but the children cannot get out this time. While singing this, hindi ko na alam ano yung title. Lost Horizon nga pala ang title nito. But it was good remembering na kanina, yung mga farm jobs least affected, and that is what I see around me. Pero personally, sabi namin, if things or when things will get worse, what will we plant? Right now, we have adlay. But nobody will buy it when times will become so difficult. Only the richer one can afford the 250 to 300 peso per kilo grains. So sabi namin, maybe we better turn our adlay into wine because when things are difficult, people will still drink wine and liquor. That's a joke. Anyway, I'd like to thank Prof. Cielito Habito for helping us understand our current situation and the strategies to move out. I know that even after this webinar, I will go back to the presentations. And Prof, I hope you can publish updates on your presentations because data change very fast. The next month, maybe the situation can be different. Thank you also, Rico, for the emphasis that we are not going back to the old ways, for the inputs on survival, which can be applied on a personal and institutional level. I think the question now is really how fast we can adapt. Next slide, please. Next slide. These are my thoughts. 3 things based on the presentation. More difficult days, kung hindi nga days, years ahead. And I think we have to look at how we should imagine ourselves when times will become so difficult at the personal and institutional level. And hindi na pwedeng yearly, pwede monthly ang tingin mo kasi iba-iba yung nangyayari. And also here, we emphasize the importance of data because it's difficult to do something, decide on something when you don't have the data. Pangalawa, how fast have social enterprises adapted? Are we catching up on digitalization? Pangatlo, I think in the difficult times, it's always best when we are organized. Sabi nga, heal as one, survive as one, digitalize as one, lobby as one. We need to collaborate across sectors. Hopefully there can be some consolidations, especially with cooperatives. And don't forget, dinagdag ko na lang ito, stay healthy because this is what we can do individually, the body as the last line of defense against COVID-19. So I'll deal with these 3 items that I have mentioned. Next slide, please. Dito sa more difficult days ahead, Prof. Shell has shown us all the indicators. Ang tanong ko, who among the poor will bear the brunt? Tama ba ako to say that those receiving CCT will not be hit hard because they already have their allocation? We will be dealing with the new poor, those who lost their jobs. Bagsak kasi ang employment. Those whose micro-enterprises will have closed and those with reduced income. And I think for the new poor, we will not just be thinking of economic measures, but even psychological counseling. Individually, we should all strive to be healthy, taking care of our immune system, budgeting our money, as mentioned by Rico, we may even need to even cut our needs. Ang tanong ko, up to this time, are the social enterprises rising up? Let me share with you some data of cooperatives. These are 31 co-ops with data from December 2019 to May 2020. And if you look at this data, I am amazed to see that there was no massive withdrawals from the cooperatives. Deposits have even increased and now flattened. Baka nga hindi rin nag-spend ang mga tao. You also see that liquidity, the cash on hand and cash in bank, has in fact increased. What is notable is the reduction in the interest income in March and April due to the moratorium, but we see a bouncing back in May. And if you look at the May figures, it is already 75% of the January level. The service fees, which is an indicator of the loan releases, dropped in March and April, but also bounced back in May. Dito ko ma-remember yung sinasabi ni Prof na during difficult times, the financial sector wins all the time. Profitability sa co-ops affected and delinquency has increased, but we only need regulatory relief to ensure the capital adequacy. If I look at the kaninang presentation, sabi nga sa financial sector, heads they win, tails will lose. But in cooperatives, because the members also own the co-op, they will win all the time if the financial cooperative will win. If I look at the cooperatives, 60% are into financial services. So hopefully, the cooperatives will survive. And generally, the cooperatives entered COVID with very high liquidity. And up to this time, the liquidity of the cooperatives remain high. So for social enterprises, which are up and running, we need to imagine ourselves in the worst of time. And we even need to define what is the worst. And I also remember what Rico said, na hindi naman basta-basta that you cut your cost. We really need to look at investments. And I think at this time, digitalization remains to be an imperative investment. I am sure all enterprises have replanned, reduced their targets, but that is for the year. We need to think more than the year and expect that the worst will come. How fast have social enterprises adapted? Next slide, please. In the face of stay-at-home, localized value chains, work from home, stay-at-home, online learning, distance education, what are we seeing? One of the pictures here is the efforts of PBSP to supply food to communities in NCR and Rizal at the height of lockdown. NATCO supplied 54 tons of veggies, tons of rice and dried fish to 12,000 individuals from 257 farmers. We have not done this before, but because of COVID, we're able to do it. Ang question nga, can we do this permanently rather than just during the lockdown? We also see how Pakisama, Sok Bansuela, and Agri-Co-op handled farmers market on subdivisions with the products from the Dumagat farmers. And right now, FPSDC with their products, these are now being sold by the savings and credit cooperatives in NCR. We also remind ourselves na even before COVID, FPSDC already had the e-commerce platform and put to use some more in this time of COVID. Next slide. At the cooperatives level, we have seen some of the savings and credit cooperatives venture into more online activities just to adapt. So usually meron kaming pre-membership education seminar. This can now be done online. Meron ng mga online application via Google Forms. Merong online webinar for overseas Filipinos. I hope we can help those who are still outside of the country to really consider setting aside some money. For NATCO, we have a whole set of digital applications for primary cooperatives to allow for online boarding of members, even sending messages to the members. Nakikita din namin that some of our cooperatives have put on online selling. They can sell the products of the members and the members can buy from another member. For the payment platform, NATCO actually has partnered with PFCCO for a Kaya payment platform, and we are already registered with the central bank. We are waiting that we will be allowed by central bank to connect to InstaPay and PesoNet so that our Kaya mobile can be interoperable to the whole banking system. We have seen increases in the use of ATM cards, but we still have to see very fast growth in the use of our mobile banking. Mahina pa rin kami dyan. Next slide. I think what we're seeing here is that ang third slide ko is we are better and we will rise up to the challenge if we are organized. We cannot do digitalization as individuals, but we can do this as a group. We can digitalize as one and we lobby as one. Prof. Habito mentioned about strengthening community association, strengthening the band, and for us NGOs, organizing our core. But how do we now organize in the digital world? That can be another topic. We have already shared some of the initiatives of FSSI, but currently we have a rehabilitation product for existing partners. So if you look at the current initiatives of cooperatives, we have also partnered with LGUs and government agencies to allow for the provision of the food. this is important so that we can really move also the products of the farmers. And kanina, I would like to, I think Rico has raised a challenge on how FSSI as an investor can provide more support services for social enterprises. And balikan natin yung paano nga pala mag-organize tayo sa markets dyan sa NCR so that there can be direct linkage with the farmers. In lobbying as one, paano ba natin ma-ensure that we will also benefit from the stimulus fund? Next slide, if there is still a next slide. Lastly, I would like to end my reaction by going back to the principles for the cooperatives, which can also be applied to social enterprises. When there is caring for the community, there is solidarity, self-help, and self-responsibility. Even as we prepare for the worst, let us hope and pray. Build on that hope by working together, connecting to each other. Connect to the farmers and the consumers, and connect our payment platform to the other platforms in the country. Thank you again, Prof. Ciel and Rico Gonzalez, for the presentations, for making us think deep and hopefully act fast. Thank you.
Daghang salamat, Ibing, for that wonderful reaction. We will now open our webinar for the questions and reactions from the participants. But before that, we would like to remind everyone of our house rules. Our house rules, number one, let us ensure that our microphones are always on mute. Let me enlarge what I'm looking at. We have set an open forum, and that's going to happen in a while, where you can raise your questions to our speakers. And that means that when you are recognized, you can then unmute the moderators. We will also mute your microphones at any time to avoid background noise. During the open forum, please type in your questions or comments in the chat box and include your name and your organization. If you are addressing your question or your comment to a particular speaker, please indicate that. And then during also the open forum, you may be called by the moderator so that you can ask or comment directly live, or the moderators may just read your comments and questions. Number two, please shut off your video to optimize your bandwidth. And you can turn on your video when you are called to speak during the open forum. We would also ask you to not share your screens to make any kind of presentations. And the fourth one, the webinar is being recorded and will be shared to all the participants. So we will also email to you a copy of the key takeaways of our discussions. Okay, so with that, we'd also like to mention again that we have about 100 viewers on FSSI's Facebook page. And those watching on FB, you can also send us your question by writing on the comments section of the page. O ano, simulan na natin yung ating mga comments and questions. But I would just like to read one comment muna, no, from our via Zoom. This was sent by Vicky Segovia. Hello, Vicky. How are you? Long time no see. The comment of Vicky is that two excellent speakers, and she finds the webinar very great. We have also a comment from our FB page from Ms. Joy Maghirang. She finds the webinar so informative and enlightening to hear the wisdom from knowledgeable speakers. Thank you very much. Tatawagin ko yung nakita naming magandang tanong kasi when you registered, there was a portion that you can ask ahead. So may I call on Ms. Tetay from FPSDC? Ms. Tetay?
Thank you very much, Ms. Butch. Una po sa lahat, I would like to thank muna si Sir Rico at saka si Prof. Shell for a very wonderful presentation. Salamat po. My question is directed to the two of them. I am Tetay Plantilla from the Federation of People Sustainable Development Cooperative or FPSDC. And like FSSI po, FPSDC is also an advocate of the 3BL, People, Planet, and Profit. On the planet bottom line, taking a backseat as the country grapples to save the economy or the profit bottom line, how can the government and the CSO sector, especially po yung resource institutions, balance this? What do you think can be experimented po at this time? Thank you.
Well, let me say something about what I saw dun sa We Recover as One document na nilabas ng NEDA. I don't know if it's actually in their website in case you hadn't seen it. But what actually was somewhat pleasing to me to find out is that they are precisely deliberately trying to avoid what I was talking about that's happening in the US, in Australia, South Africa, wherein they're actually putting aside environmental regulations in the name of allowing business to recover faster. It is at least explicit in the We Recover as One document of NEDA that they would more precisely and in cooperation with the DENR, more shall we say even more carefully make sure that environmental regulations and environment controls are actually observed. So they are not letting their guard down. So that to me is one source of comfort, no? Na maybe sana naman sa atin hindi mangyari yung this phenomenon of getting to a worse normal after the dust settles, simply because we had the faster priority was to get businesses back on their feet, no matter what, no? So at least hindi sila no matter what dito sa atin.
Thank you.
Yeah, Rico may want to chime in as well.
If I may, it's actually really a difficult situation and difficult question. Our approach has been tuloy-tuloy lang, no? Where it is possible, but tuloy-tuloy lang is modified because of the situation, right? We're worried about things like the amount of plastic waste that is going to be produced by all of this mask wearing, right? So if you have communities that are able to produce reusable items of this kind, it will be a wonderful way to protect people, but still safeguard the environment, because we don't wanna create another layer of the disposable culture on top of the one we're suffering through already. This is one. Two, our work for incubating enterprises that are specifically targeting the environmental agenda, I think has to continue. And so we're keenly developing curricula that can help, but we're having to adjust because a big part of doing this work now is paano mo gagawin na almost entirely virtual yung engagement. It's not the same. So we're trying to figure that out. I'm actually personally attending classes to get better at this, because we cannot assume that we're experts at making a human connection on a mobile phone or a computer. And this is something we need, even that needs to be rethought at a fundamental basis, because at the end of the day, it is people that will solve this problem. And if we cannot connect, we will not be able to do anything, right? So this is kind of fundamental. My view, however, is that there's, for all of the adjustment we do to try and do this virtually, there is still going to be a limit, and we will need physical presence at one point or another. And so managing our own processes, managing our own operations, so that we can take reasonable precautions to have this engagement in person without putting our people at risk. I think this is something that all organizations must invest in. The large companies are trying to do it very, very quickly. We need to figure out our own version of that, because we cannot be entirely cloistered in our homes and hope to be a voice in how policy and how all of these decisions are made. Right? We have to remain engaged. So there are a lot of these small pieces, right? They all have to come together coherently for us to feel safe enough to come out and re-engage in the communities where we need to be present. And then we need to complement that with ICT skills. But the mindset of looking at environmental impacts and mitigating that and doing mitigating work has to continue, right? The work that we're doing for that has to continue. Because otherwise, the tendency of people, I don't know why this is, no, but I think we have a tendency to deal with one issue at a time. So, COVID takes parang most of our mind space. We tend to forget the environmental side of this, but we really don't have time. We cannot delay that agenda, right? So the truth is there is no known way yet to do this. There is no how do I say this? Walang instant noodle solution pa na ipapasok mo na lang sa iboboil mo na lang yung tubig, ibabagsak mo yung noodles, tapos na, no? That solution, that approach, that is going to come from you. You're going to be the ones that figure out how we can keep doing this. And so I think it's important to keep engaged and to keep doing this. We will find a new way to get this done. But the only way that will happen is to keep at it.
Thank you, Rico. For the second question, we'd like to call on Vi Reyes from Bote Central. Vi, are you there?
Hello, I'm here, sorry.
Please, go ahead.
Good afternoon po. Mr. Rico Gonzalez and Professor Cielito. My name is Vi Reyes. I'm from Bote Central and Philippine Coffee Alliance. So the questions I registered were already answered by both of you very explicitly, and it was so encouraging actually. Thus, I'd like to change my question. With the new normal, how do you see international trade coming along? Or would you have some notions of a sunrise domestic trade, especially for coffee, because I'm more adept in coffee. And I really like, with this webinar, just let me state it that the speakers have greatly encouraged us even more to be more emboldened with the steps that we're about to take. With the computations that we've done and the projections that we're doing, we might survive it. We can see some light. We can see the instant, okay, if I may say so. We can go through the instant solution that you've mentioned. And it's because of the competition between the imported coffee and the local coffees. So I'd like to see more local economies sprouting along, or of communities, which we have been advocating ever since, because we are the disruptors in the coffee industry. And I'd like to see more local trade, if that's possible, as against the international trade. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, in fact, you're right. No? Kasi as I already also alluded to, the slowdown in international trade even started before COVID. I mean, the inevitable impact of this US-China trade war was the disruption of the global value chains. And these are present not only in manufactured products, in non-farm manufactured products, but even in manufactured food products. So then the other thing I mentioned indeed was we are now seeing more local or more more localized supply chains, and this precisely provides the opportunities for social enterprise to actually fill in gaps, no, in the supply chain, especially when the demand also tends to be more for more healthy and therefore more natural products. I have a direct observation, in fact, on coffee. My own son, who operates a restaurant here in Los Baños, has actually branched out into grinding coffee, and he sources his beans locally. You know, so he's very, very creative, and then he labels them with all sorts of imaginative names. And you know, he's now actually marketing ground coffee that he roasted and blended himself. So I think, you know, just looking at my son, I'm sure many others are thinking of doing the same thing, and that's precisely providing a lot of new opportunities. So it heartens me to see that, okay, never mind those global supply chain, global value chains, no, but now even within the country, the supply chains are localizing. You know? Like I said, you don't need to source all the way from Benguet anymore. Marami naman palang cabbage and lettuce and other green vegetables nearby that we are now suddenly discovering simply because the lockdown forced these local supply chains to really assert themselves dahil hindi na nga pwede yung mga traditional long distance supply chains that we have been reliant on. So, you know, I have high hopes precisely for coffee and other domestic agricultural products, which, by the way, are the ones that tend to grow in our agricultural data, no? Because yung mga traditional crops natin like rice, coconut, sugar are actually on a seeming downtrend, but it's the things like coffee and cacao and not pineapple, cassava and rubber, the things that are less traditional are the ones that are actually providing growth and actually greater value to the farmers. So I applaud what you're doing, and hopefully talagang you can be instrumental precisely in further enriching this domestic local ecosystem for agricultural products like coffee.
Thank you po.
Sir Rico, you have a comment also?
This thing that Professor Habito has pointed out is a very good is a very good opportunity. This localization, it's compounding. On the one hand, you think about it, the international aviation industry has been pummeled. Ang laki ng problema nila. So anong nangyari? Nabawasan ng flights. What does that mean? So the supply and demand situation in international shipments has changed. There's actually a shortage of space on planes. So shipment rates have gone up. That means there is a window, I don't know how long it will last, there's a window where a lot of this imported stuff is now not price competitive, right? So that window is a window for nimble local producers to get local consumers to try their product. And a lot of this naman is it's a compound initiative. First, you need them to try the product,
Yes.
and then you need them to consume it again.
Yes.
Diba?
Yes.
If you're able to get the two of these together, you start to create a habit of consumption. But this time, it's your product, not some imported, diba? And the great thing about a small enterprise is because there are fewer decision makers in the room, you can be nimble. So ang sa akin, how do you identify these opportunities to get in front of the local market, get them to try? But figure out a way to get them to try this. If you must adjust based on their feedback, then do so. But until you kind of are able to build a permanent presence in their pantry, right? This is a big win. And so one of the big advantages that has happened with this lockdown is what we typically consider a premium market is suddenly forced. And the great thing is hindi ikaw ang sisisihin. They are forced to be more open to local product even if they were not originally predisposed to it. Kasi yung normally ini-import nila, hindi na nila makuha. Malaking bagay yon. Malaking opening yon. Now, kailangan organized ka enough na while the opening is there, kaya mong tapatan. So this is why I think the adjustment in our organizations, they must happen rapidly.
Yes.
We don't have the luxury of waiting. Kasi these windows will not remain windows of opportunity for us for very long. While they're there, you must strike. Therefore, you must be ready quickly.
I'll be going to FSSI tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir
Thank you.
Rico. I think yung kasama kong si Larry may tanong.
Yeah, while we are looking, there are a lot of questions actually. So while we're sorting it out, I have a question. You both mentioned about the need to decentralize these centers of economic activity, and or in some instances it has been localized, and it has been commented that it's not yet permanent. So my question is, how ready are our infrastructures to start decentralizing the centers of economic activity, and at the same time making it localized so that it becomes more permanent rather than merely reacting to the current situation?
Well, the quick question is they're not ready, unfortunately. That's why itong Balik Provincia program, a lot of people are skeptical because you cannot do it overnight unless all that infrastructure support, plus many other things that are needed, sustain livelihoods and occupations out in the countryside are already in place. But precisely that's the reason why I think, as I understand it, they are really reviewing the build program to really make it much more geared towards essentially diverting more economic activities away from Metro Manila and away from the major urban centers like Cebu and Davao, and create more urban centers, in fact, so that they're more dispersed all over the country. That's the number one solution, which again will take a while, but hopefully they are successful in reconfiguring the build to do that. But secondly, there are policy levers as well that they can pull and push on to be able to make that kind of dispersal happen. Just one example is this. I mentioned Manila Port. Actually, since the time that there was this port congestion problem, or that led to the traffic congestion in Metro Manila, when then Mayor Joseph Estrada banned the cargo trucks in the city streets. At that time, the clamor already was, why can't we decongest the Manila port? Why can't we divert all the shipments out of Manila into Cebu and, Subic and Batangas, which actually we borrowed hundreds of millions of pesos from the Japanese to upgrade into international ports. And then they ended up with 3% capacity utilization. So, ang nangyari, parang masyadong Manila-centric pa rin. So again, this time, we really have to have the government directly say, dun kayo. Kasi if you just allow it to be done on market forces, they will still keep going to Manila dahil malaki talaga yung difference ng freight rates if they were to land or pick up cargo from Manila as against Subic or Batangas. But the only way we could see at the time was government really has to force it. So again, these are the kinds of policy and regulatory levers that can be done to precisely, make this happen, this kind of decentralization of economic activity happen. Of course, there's that long considered idea of shifting the whole seat of government outside of Metro Manila. Clark has always been the number one candidate, diba? But well, we don't know. They're developing the green city there. They just might do it someday, but this is part of all that decentralization. In the meantime, we still see the numbers really lopsided for Metro Manila. I pointed out, for example, how in the original build configuration, the bulk of it was still Metro Manila projects. Number two, instead of the share of Metro Manila and the surrounding provinces of Calabarzon and Santa Luzon, instead of the share on GDP of this area going down, it has been going up in the last 10, 15 years. So we have to do something deliberate to develop more economic activity outside of these centers. So it's going to be a long-term journey, but you know, a whole journey like that takes the first step. So right now, I hope the government is really intent on taking those first steps towards making that happen.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Professor Shell. We have a question here from Ms. Marilyn Tejada. I think she's with also connected with Ateneo. The question is, I'd like to read. I understand that social enterprises are also entail community organizing. Is there a new way of community organizing now that we have limited mobility, given that some areas are still in strict rules on transferring and municipal borders? And I think also that would refer as well to moving goods from one area to another, in addition to mobilizing people. Professor?
Well, we all know our number one obstacle, which is connectivity and accessibility of connectivity. It would be ideal if everybody can be getting online and having Zoom sessions like this, but alam naman natin that the access both to internet and to the devices that allow you to access the internet is still very much lopsided. And you know, the so-called digital divide is still determining who benefits and who can latch onto opportunities and who are going to be left behind. That's why, well, NEDA, by the way, at least recognizes this. That's why very prominent in the We Recover as One agenda also is really making sure that our internet connectivity is not only better quality, but also more widespread and more accessible all over the country. Now, how that exactly will be done? Well, is it the third telco player that is going to be owned by an alleged presidential crony, or is it government itself getting into a national broadband network with all our past unpleasant experience in attempting to do that in the past? Well, that's up in the air, but definitely we know what direction we have to move towards. That's our first obstacle, because like it or not, the only way, if we are not physically able to meet together, is to meet like this online. And it works. I mean, for those of us who can access the medium, it works very well. Kaya lang sana pati na yung mga kababayan natin na nasa mga barangay in the countryside can do the same, even if it's just through their phones. No?
Well, as a joke, na-notice namin, Professor, our board meetings are suddenly perfect attendance with
yes.
online meetings.
Yeah.
You can say that again. Yeah. Lahat ng board meetings na na-attendan ko, ganun.
Yeah. And on time also. And we finish on time also.
Oo nga, no? Nawala yung Filipino time kasi wala na excuse na traffic eh.
Right, right. We have here another question from Ida Baltasar, staff of FSSI, and this is directed to Rico. Among social enterprises of Xchange, what are the adjustments they are making to stay afloat the next 2 years or beyond?
Okay, madami nagko-cost cut. Kailangan eh. A lot of, but it's taking time because there is a lot of deliberate. Kailangan very, very careful. And what will I say? For a lot of social enterprises, the biggest, what that we see, the biggest cost contributor is manpower. But that is also the last to cut because this is your value driver. Diba? Pag wala ang tao mo, ano ang ability mo to deliver change? So it's a very, very difficult situation. So what we do things like, can we find a cheaper provider of internet? Can we reduce office sizes? Diba? We look at where there are possibilities of reducing cost, where we do not necessarily alter the value driver. And this is the key, right? How do you protect the value driver in your organization as you're making this adjustment? Now, if there are easy avenues, kunwari meron ka ng mga projects na nakakontrata na, then you want that revenue to come in. So you must consider, how do I deliver anyway so that I can get paid, right? And so this is the situation that will force you to be somewhat more innovative about the approach. And it isn't always a direct cost cut. Sometimes you must invest to be able to cut cost. Diba? So maybe you can reduce travel budgets because you have to social distance anyway. But if your staff don't have mobile phones, mahirap mag-reduce ng travel budget. Kasi paano mong gagawin, di ba? Now, there are creative ways around it. We know somebody, for example, that we're trying to help, who had a program that was teaching kids in urban poor communities in person. Tumama ang pandemic, hindi na pwede. So anong ginagawa nila? Nagtuturo pa rin sila very, very effectively. They're doing it through the mobile phones of the moms. Kasi in the urban poor communities, actually very prevalent ang mobile phone use. Pero limited ang budgets. So ano ang avenue? Yung libreng service ng Facebook. So yung content pumupunta sa nanay, yung nanay tinuturuan through the same platform to teach the kids. So there are innovative ways to try and stay connected and achieve value with these connections. But this is the thing, right? This is not our normal course. These are not the things that we think of. But this is precisely the kind of situation that will create novelty. Kasi in a situation like this, presado kang humanap ng diskarte. And that diskarte may be, sometimes it will not work, but it may allow you to discover an avenue to connect and to still deliver while reducing your cost and extending your runway, right? And this is what is critical. It becomes the term that we use is pahabaan ng PC. Diba? It becomes that kind of game. Because you do not know how long this will be, you must be very, very prudent about extending this runway as far as you can, right? But, and I say this to a lot of people, the objective is not survival for survival's sake. As a social enterprise, you are trying to survive because you think you can change the world. Do not give up your ability to change the world in order to survive. Kasi, what is the point of surviving if you will just survive?
Thank you, Rico. I'd like to read here a comment, and it's also a question from Idil Guyano, one of our members of FSSI. In this COVID-19 situation, the more vulnerable people and communities are really those that need help for employment and income for their food. But at the same time, the government, private and private funders' resources are getting thin. So we expect less intervention from them. Is there any advice or suggestion that you can give to communities engaged in social enterprises in order to survive? Like how long kaya ang situation na ito? Paano yung economy natin, no? Kung yung pandemic mag-i-extend pa, maybe Professor Shell can comment on this, no? If the pandemic extends longer than anticipated, how long can our economy survive?
Well, we definitely have to rely more on our more local economies, no? And again, the earlier part of your question, communities really have to come together and look out for one another, because the help coming from the national government and even from more local governments, it can only go so far. And in fact, parang ubos na nga daw, no? So in fact, our national government already has indicated that they could not even fund the Arise bill or the economic stimulus program that Congress has put together. So really, it's going to really have to be much more self-reliant among our communities. And, of course, we all know that there's so much out there. If people just really decide to come together, then, I'm reminded of that gospel about the multiplication of the loaves and fish. I mean, as long as there is really a genuine spirit of cooperation, you will always find that the resources are there. And of course, agriculture is something that is a bottomless well, as long as we can all practice agriculture in our own yards, in our own spaces. There are many vacant lots in subdivisions like I live in, for example. My wife is actively trying to rally the informal settlers around just to get these particular idle lots productively planted to things that they themselves can consume. So it's things like that that really have to bring to the fore in times like this. But looking at more macro, how much longer can we stand this kind of an economic lockdown? Well, we really have to make some changes in the way we're approaching COVID, because the problem is what we did, and we are reputed to be among the worst, well, among the countries of the world, who did the strongest types of lockdowns. Many other countries, especially those around us, were more focused. They emphasized that tracing, contact tracing, testing, and of course treating, so that you don't have to immobilize the entire economy. So that's why we cannot afford to go back to ECQ. Bumalik tayo sa Metro Manila, went back from MGCQ to GCQ, and so with us here in Laguna. But I don't think we should really go back to ECQ. However, we have to do much better work in the contact tracing, so that we can be much more rifle focused in our addressing COVID. Hindi yung shotgun approach, lahat shut down, no? And therefore lahat patay, no? So this is the kind of approach that has been, by the way, marking our economic policies for so long. No? You have one policy to address a particular group, but you penalize everybody else with that policy. So this is the kind of more focused approach that has to be done if we want to get out of this crisis. If we want to get out of our economic depression right now, even if the pandemic crisis persists, we just have to be more focused on how to solve that pandemic in a much more focused way, without immobilizing the rest of our economy.
An immediate practical suggestion for the first part of the question, which was more SEs and funding, no? And this is to the funders that are listening, but also to the organizations. Can you raise the possibility, if you have existing funding structures with institutions, or if you are funding social enterprises at the moment, can we consider the possibility of unrestricting programmed funding as a way to adjust to the existing situation? Kasi pwedeng with organizations, nandiyan yung pera, pero hindi nila magalaw kasi nakakommit for programs na hindi na nila mo pursue. I think it is important to consider with flexibility the situation of these organizations, right? Because if these organizations die, it sets the social agenda back decades. And we need as much as possible for these organizations to survive. So for the funders, but also for the organizations, maybe, I know this is something that is kind of scary to raise, but maybe ask, pwede bang kahit na portions of this funding ma-unrestrict para maging resiliency resource as opposed to program-tied resource?
Thank you. There are two questions related to financing that I'd like to ask. The first one is to you, Rico. So with that comment, how do there's a question here? I'll just rephrase it. How do you now restructure or rearrange your social enterprise to make it more attractive for funders? And the second one is, if you have limited financial resources, what do you prioritize? Paying existing debt, or improve your liquidity and invest further under the new normal?
So we one of our, not entirely COVID related, but because the situation demanded it, we have one enterprise na may pending maturity ng debt. In-extend namin yon for 2 years. Kasi from a creditor's perspective, kung pupwersahin ko tapos mamamatay siya, ako rin yung mawawala ng pera eh. Diba? So, in this sense, there is going to be some flexibility, right? I think what is important is this discussion is had, but it is had rationally. Hindi naman pwedeng walang basis. Diba? Kasi we're all kind of trying to execute on a change agenda. Diba? So we need to find kind of this meeting of the minds. So if it's something like an overwhelming debt, I think as early as possible, have the conversation about extending maturities. That's one. If it's possible to get your repayments delayed or to get interest cost reduced, this is all going to be very helpful. But the quid pro quo must be that you also exercise rationality in the way that you operate. Diba? I think part of, as a funder, I become more confident if the institution I am funding is the one that's already volunteering. Ito pong mga activities na to, hindi ito mission critical, ititigil muna namin kasi magastos. Kesa ako pa yung papasok at magsasabing, kailangan mong gawin ito, di ba? Kung pinag-isipan na ninyo to at you offer it as a quid pro quo to the funder, it generates a level of confidence that you are being very rational about your operations. Because what you need here is a meeting of the minds, right? Because it's all about trust. The funder has to trust that you will do the right thing, and you must trust that the funder will exercise, because we're all talking about social impact here, right? Will exercise prudent judgment, not just about you, but about the sector as a whole, right? Subject, of course, to limitations. Sometimes, nakatali ang kamay natin, di ba? Kung may maturity ka nga, gusto mo ng, meron kami kinausap na ganito, gusto niya ng ease terms, pero yung nagpahiram sa kanya, nakaipit din kasi kailangan magbayad sa iba. Nagka-cascade yung maturity. Hindi kanya mabigyan ng ease terms kasi hindi siya makakuha on the other side, right? So another thing that might help in this situation, and we do not know yet whether there are windows of this, we have not encountered it yet, but it may be something that is viable to build at this time, is refinancing windows. And this is a difficult conversation because creditors in general do not like bailing out other creditors. Right? But if a social enterprise is going to die because of an unfriendly creditor, it may be sensible for us to replace that creditor with somebody that understands the social agenda better, right? This is something that we would have to figure out as a sector. I would say, don't wait for it kasi ang hirap to get agreement with something like this. Malaki yung risk factors eh. But this is why across different sectors, we're seeing, and even we are trying to build, a COVID resiliency fund. Basically, bridge financing for organizations that are struggling because of the pandemic. I think a lot of organizations are trying to figure this out. Kami, we're at the early stage of it, diba? Because we need to figure out how to fund it. But the intention is already, how do we provide this kind of lifeline to enterprises that are impact-driven? Kasi ang unahin ng gobyerno, yung makikita mo na ang nauuna yung large businesses, susunod yung mga commercial na SME, hindi masyadong naiisip yung mga co-op, yung mga NGO, yung mga social enterprises, di ba? But we need to protect that pool of resource because that's critically important to our long-term agenda. So we're trying to figure that out as part of this.
Thank you, Rico. We really are interested to get to share a lot of questions, Sana, but we're running out of time. What I'd like to do is to read off about 3 comments. We have 2 from the chat section and also 1 from Facebook. This is a comment from Marie Torres with Investing in Women Project. Aside from environmental impacts, I think social safeguards may also be less prioritized. Occupational health and safety, workplace, gender equality can be pushed aside for cost saving and business survival. So it's something to think about. We have a comment from Corazon Sahonas. I agree with you, Professor Shell. We should look into the opportunity the COVID-19 brought to local entrepreneurs, particularly the agriculture sector. We are able to look into our capabilities to fit into the present situation. Though there is a bigger impact to much bigger entrepreneurs, still there are still opportunities to rise from the rambles brought about by COVID through networking. Thank you so much for the presentation and sharing from both Sir Rico and Sir Shale. And from FB, we have a comment from Lisa Marie Dacanay, our friend from the SE Group. Anniversary cheers to FSSI. More than ever, we need to push for the enactment of the poverty reduction through social entrepreneurship, or the present bill, and work towards engaging government to put in place a responsive recovery program for social enterprises as transformational partners of the poor in building back better. This is indeed a very, Larry, would you agree? A very
Yes.
wonderful discussion.
That's right.
And we would like to, sana yung lahat ng tanong maipasa natin sa kanila, no? Maybe we'll just email them to our speakers and then they can respond to those questions.
Yeah.
With that, maybe we can ask Professor Shale and
We'll have
Sir
Rico to have the last word and then see Professor Chen if they have any last words.
Rico first.
Siguro, as a last word, I will respond to Marie's comment about that you just repeated. Hi, hello. Over the last year or two, we have at Xchange kind of revisited our own perspective on investment for impact. We used to look at investing in social enterprises as fundamentally about achieving impact in certain issue areas, whether it is environment, education, the poverty agenda, you name it, right? And that was our main lens. We treated gender equality as nice to have, but not essential. Over the last year and a half, we have come to rethink that perspective. And part of that rethinking is a recognition that in almost any issue area, when you give women power, the world improves. And so we now do not think of gender equality as an outcome. We think of it as a lever for change. Let women into the room, let them make the decisions, and the world gets better. So let me end on that.
Okay. For Rico, it's women. I guess for me, my keyword would be community. And I'll go back to my earlier message about social bonding or social bridging. I'd always been uncomfortable with the choice of the phrase social distancing when all they really had in mind was physical distancing. So let not the physical distancing that is forced upon us by COVID lead to actual social distancing. And the way out of this crisis, no matter how long it lasts, is to us to find comfort in one another. Those of us who are close to one another, in various physical or even virtual communities, so that by making sure that our bonds with one another, we can actually strengthen those and get over this crisis much better collectively. So let us practice the physical distancing needed, certainly, but let's make sure that that does not lead to social distancing, but rather social bridging and hopefully social bonding. Yun lang. Thank you very much and good afternoon to everybody.
Thank you, Rico. Thank you, Prof. Shel. This has been a very wonderful afternoon spent listening to your presentations and words of wisdom. At this point, we'd like to call on the Executive Director of FSSI, Dodo or Sixto Donato C. Makasait for his closing remarks.
Sige. Magandang hapon sa lahat. Totoo, no, na very engaging, very productive, very insightful discussion natin ngayong hapon. I just like to, in closing siguro, just pick up a few points that I think are very important from what has been discussed in the past hours, no? Ano nga ba? 2 hours or so. Una, malinaw na may epekto talaga yung COVID-19, yung pandemic sa ating ekonomiya. No? One figure cited by Dr. Shel was yung unemployment. No? It has increased to 18%. Pero mas malinaw siguro yung we have lost 8 million jobs. No? 8 million jobs. Siguro 5 to 6 million families ang affected no? 25, 30 million Filipinos. So malaki talaga ang tama ng COVID-19 sa atin. Especially for the micro, small, and medium enterprises. That was also pointed out. No? We had a survey, yung FSSI, we had a survey among our partners in April, which showed that around 2/3 of our partners stopped their operations either totally or partially because of the quarantine, and 90% said that their revenues and their incomes were affected. No? DTI itself also had a survey of MSMEs, which they released in May, showing basically the same figures then. Yung effects sa MSMEs, around 2/3 stopped their operations partially or totally. No? So malaking epekto sa atin. And then we also saw, sabi ni Rico, yung deep deficiencies, no, in our various systems, including our transport systems, our food supply chains, our health system. So that was shown by the COVID-19. And then moving forward, are we looking for a quick recovery? Well, Dr. Shel said more likely it will take some time. No? More likely it's a U-shaped recovery, hindi yung ganun na mabilis. No? Hopefully not an L-shaped recovery. And hopefully also when we recover and we go back, it will not be the worst normal where environmental standards are decreased, where social safeguards are set aside, where monopolies and cartels get a bigger share of the economy because many small businesses have closed down. No? Sana hindi ganung klaseng normal yung ating pupuntahan after we've recovered. So what's the call for social enterprises, particularly in this time? No? From our speakers, we said, para ako i-summarize ko sa mga S, tatlong S. Yung una ay survive. Sabi ni Rico, we have to survive. Social enterprises have to survive. And to survive, we have to focus on what is mission critical, what is really most important to what we want to do, to our vision and to our mission. Pangalawa ay seek solutions. Ngayon, now that we've had this disruption, it also opens up yung new possibilities. Diba? It also opens up new solutions and it's happening naman. People are working on solutions, various solutions. Rico showed some. Shell also cited some community efforts. Si Ibing also cited yung mga coming together of different groups to provide solutions to the problems that we face. So we need to seek solutions, we need to support solutions as they come out. Yung pangatlong S ay social bonding. Happily, doon sa survey that we did in April, it also showed that even as social enterprises were affected, heavily affected for some of them, half of them still managed to provide assistance to their communities, to their members, either in terms of yung iba financial assistance, in terms of delaying or suspending loan collections, waiving penalties. Others were also even able to provide food assistance or other assistance in terms of yung mga in-kind assistance to their community members, or to their workers, or to their members. So even amidst that, the hardships, the difficulties, social enterprises managed to support the community, the workers, the members, no? At mahalaga yun. That's part of social bonding. Groups, resource institutions like FSSI, PBSP, NATCO, many others have also banded together to support yung ito. So mahalaga yung social bonding. And social bonding needs to happen across sectors, with government, with business, with other civil society organizations, and with citizens, individual citizens coming together, seeking solutions, helping each other out. At mahalaga sa ganong social bonding efforts or social solutions ay yung resources, shared resources. Some have more than others, but all of us have resources. It's important to share resources. I think it's also important to have clear targeting, di ba? Yung sabi na kanina, sino ba talaga ang kailangan tulungan at paano natin sila matutulungan? Hindi sana parang one solution fits all. At hindi naman din shotgun approach na bahala na, pero clear targeting. And then sa ganyan mga social bonding, sa mga partnerships, mahalaga, it's very important to have participation and transparency. I think that's a call for all sectors. Well, personally, I think it's a call, especially for government, to open up to more partnerships, to be more participatory, and to be more transparent as we seek solutions to this situation. So yun, survive, seek solutions, social bonding, and all of that sana towards a sustainable lifestyle and towards a sustainable future for all of us. So maraming salamat din sa mga speakers, sa ating mga participants, sa kay Bing din, sa ating reactor. And we hope, si Bing yata nagsabi na it's good to be discussing, good to be proposing, but we also have to continue to act. So yun po. Maraming salamat.
Thank you, Dodo. We also would like to thank those who joined us, for all of you who joined us in our first FSSI anniversary webinar, and also to our viewers on Facebook. We will be emailing you copies of the speakers' presentations and highlights. And then we would also hope to see you in our next webinar.
Yes, but before that, we'll have some picture taking and then polling.
So for the picture taking, please turn on your videos. You can now vote in the poll that we just placed up. You can see it on your screen.
And maybe you may have some suggestions if ever we have another webinar in the near future. You may have some suggestions as to topics that can be discussed.
Hello, ready na po for picture taking. Ready, 1, 2, smile. Okay, next slide pa, one more. So mga 5 times natin gagawin. Okay, ready po. Yung mga naka-off pa po yung videos, please open po your videos para masama sa picture taking. Okay po. Ready? Isa pa po. May mga naka-off pa po yung videos. Please open your videos para masama. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, one more. May mga naka-off pa po yung video. Sir Levin, Sir Roland, Ferdinand, Miss Marie Torres.
Hindi ko po ma-off yung sa akin. Baka dyan, dyan yata sa inyo.
Hold on, sir. Yung mga naka-off pa po yung videos.
Alan, parang anghel ah.
Sino mukhang anghel?
Si Alan. Pero may pakpak sa likuran.
Anghel talaga yan si Alan.
Oo, grabe.
Ako si stop yung sa akin, sabi naman niya.
Sa host, baka na-control sa host yung video.
Check na po sa Ferdinand Valdez. Host daw ang nag-stop.
Lagot ka host.
Oh, lagot ka host.
Sino ba yun?
Oo. Wala na trabaho yan bukas.
Last na lang po.
Sino ba yung host niyan?
Hi, Ben.
Okay, thank you.
Yan na. Okay.
Okay.
Salamat, Prof. Chel. Salamat, Rico.
Salamat, Chel.
Salamat,
everyone. Salamat po si Love.
Salamat, Larry. Salamat, Coach.
Salamat, Larry. Salamat, Dodo.
Salamat.
Watch out for the invitation for the next FSSI webinar. We promise it's going to be exciting. Bye.
Ingat po kayong lahat.
Done?
Salamat po.
Okay, so thank you again to everyone for participating, and see you again in the next webinar of FSSI. Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you. God bless.
Bye.
Salamat po. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.